My wife was cheating on me when I returned from a business trip early. I found her in bed with him, and accidentally him with a stun. I wish I could create an intense narrative about discovering my spouse's infidelity, but honestly it felt like something out of a poorly written soap opera. I am employed at a local machinery plant, producing automotive components. The job isn't prestigious, but it pays the bills. I consider myself lucky, spending 8 hours daily from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. 5 days a week, operating an outdated machine, dressed in protective gear goggles, ear protection, steel-capped boots, and a leather apron. I meet my daily targets and, if luck is on my side, might earn an end-of-year bonus. I own a comfortable 2-bedroom house, have a wife named Susan, and 2 daughters in middle school. After 10 years of marriage, I thought everything was stable until today. Our facility has 4 sections for assembling automotive parts, all driven by compressed air. In my 6 years at this job, we've never encountered equipment malfunctions. But today, halfway through my shift, the compressed air system failed. The air must be completely dry to operate correctly, filtered and dehydrated by automatic systems. But today it malfunctioned. The dehydrator didn't remove the moisture as it should have. I'm no technician, but I know that when moisture combines with high-pressure air, everything freezes, halting production. Instead of waiting around, they sent us home without pay. It's ironic, my entire routine disrupted by humidity. Walking into my bedroom, I was met with the sight of a man's back moving over Susan. Instinctively, I turned on the overhead light. Susan wasn't asleep. She glared at me, annoyed, and asked why I was home. I expected fear, an apology, or shame, but she was enraged instead. When I asked why she was upset, she snapped that I knew exactly what was happening. She regretted that I had to witness it, but blamed me for not being home on time. According to her, if I had been on schedule, the other man wouldn't have been there, and she wouldn't have been caught. The man, previously obscured by the bed, turned and grinned at me. Susan half-heartedly covered herself for modesty. My mistake was grabbing him as he got off the bed. Standing, he appeared much larger. For my trouble, I received 2 painful blows to the ribs. I didn't land a single hit before I was on the floor, gasping for air. I think I got struck on the side of my head, and then everything went dark. I woke up in the hospital, my ribs being bandaged by a nurse. Susan was nearby looking disgusted. Once the nurse left, I confronted her. Who was that man and why was he in our house? His name's Robert. He's a friend, and I invited him over, she replied nonchalantly. You were with him in our bed with our children just down the hall? Yeah, I know. If you hadn't made a scene, they wouldn't have woken up. What was he doing here? How many times are you going to ask? Robert and I have been seeing each other for about 4 months. We tried to keep it from you. We don't usually come here, but I couldn't find a babysitter. Is it over now? No, it's not. You're a good father and husband, but Robert is amazing in bed. I don't see why we should end it just because you found out. But I promise we won't meet here anymore. It's not fair to you or the kids. Susan, that's unacceptable. It ends now. If you try to interfere with my relationship with Robert, you'll regret it. He can beat you up easily, and hell do it again if you push it. Everyone will know you're a loser, our friends, family, even your colleagues. Your life will be miserable. Don't you care what anyone thinks? You'd stoop that low just to hurt me? If I have to, but I doubt you'll risk it. Robert thinks you're a loser, and I agree. You'll have to live with it. Who is he anyway? Where does he work? He doesn't work. He owns Classic Autos, the luxury dealership on Elm Street. You know, the one you always wanted to visit but never did. He's wealthier, smarter, and better in bed than you. He's also stronger and better with his fists. Why not marry him if he's so wonderful? That's why I keep you, dear. Robert doesn't want kids, and I won't give mine up. You'll play house while he gets the love. You either accept it, or everyone will know what a loser you are. And by the way, I'm moving your belongings to the guest room. No need to share a bed now that it's out there. Who watched the kids when you were with Robert? Usually Emily. Sometimes your parents. Speaking of which, Emily introduced me to Robert. I'll thank her later. The next morning, they discharged me, but Susan wasn't around. I debated calling someone or taking a taxi. The taxi won. With the kids at school and Susan gone, I found all my clothes and personal belongings stacked on the guest bed. I figured my daughters might have questions, but I decided Susan could handle it. Setting up my new living space took less than an hour. Various thoughts raced through my mind, but I wasn't going to let things play out as Susan intended. My first move was retrieving my old phone recorder from the basement. It only worked with the landline, but it was my only option. Susan mainly used her cell phone for calls. Setting it up and hiding it behind some old paint cans took about 15 minutes. It was a start. Feeling miserable, I still dragged myself back to work. They offered me painkillers, but I didn't want to take them and then operate machinery. A couple of strong painkillers seemed like the better choice. Susan seriously underestimated my relationship with my colleagues. I told them everything that had happened. They all came up with ideas, some better than others. It was comforting to know my friends had my back. With an 8-hour shift ahead, we all planned to find ways to fix this during our mid-shift break for dinner. Mark spoke up first. Any suggestions? I don't have one, but I have a cousin who works for Robert. He does car detailing and despises him. He could provide information on the business, buildings, or work schedules, Mark shared. That would be helpful, Mark. Anyone else? Jake, Paul offered. I have 2 rifles and a shotgun. You're welcome to any of them. None are registered. Thanks, Paul, but that's a bit more extreme than I was considering, I said, trying to keep things in perspective. Don't even want to hear my idea? Alex interjected, a grin spreading across his face, followed by some laughter from the group. Tell us, Alex. Come on, the guys urged him on. I thought we could tie him to a tree, legs spread, and build a fire between his legs, medieval style, Alex suggested. Although his idea was met with laughter, it was quickly shot down by everyone. Evan, who hadn't spoken yet, felt the weight of our expectant gazes. What? Don't look at me like that. Yeah, I've got an idea, but it's a bit out there. Go on, Evan, I encouraged him. I remember reading about a prison where they dressed up inmates in pink jumpsuits to embarrass them. Now, I know Robert isn't an inmate, but something like that could humiliate him, Evan explained. You mean put him in a pink jumpsuit? He'd just take it off, someone pointed out. I was thinking if we could tie him up and then spray paint him entirely pink. That might do the trick, Evan elaborated, but he'd know who did it. You'd have to knock him out first, then leave him tied to a chair until he's found. Do we use medication or just punch him? What's your plan? Someone asked. I can get a taser. You just have to sneak up and shock him, Evan offered. You're making it sound easier than it probably is. How do we catch him alone and get close without him noticing? I questioned. I don't have all the answers. Just thought it was an idea, Evan admitted. The buzzer signaled another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was down, so the other guys pitched in to help. When I got home, Susan was already in bed, keeping her promise not to bring Robert into the house. I had no clue what to do. Most of the ideas the guys had were like high school pranks, like leaving a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed real revenge. The next day, after getting the kids to school and seeing Susan move around the house, I showered, shaved, and headed out. Morning, husband. No kiss? She smirked from the sink. Ignoring her, I left, needing some time alone to figure out how to get back at Robert without causing more trouble. Work was looming, and I needed to prepare. I decided to stop eating at home, the only time with the girls, because I couldn't stomach Susan's cooking. Things were normal until dinner break when Adrian proudly announced he had a taser in his car for self-protection. Don't forget to pick it up, he reminded me. When he asked if I had ever used one, I said I hadn't, but we could try it out, eliciting groans from the others. Despite the lack of new ideas, their support made me feel better. At home, my routine was the same, though working the late shift had messed up my sleep. My daughter suggested going to an amusement park, which Susan didn't mind since they'd be out all day. Then she dropped a bombshell. You need to take a few vacation days. Robert's friend Dave is visiting from out of town next week, and we're planning to go on a cruise to the Caribbean. Seriously, Susan? You want me to take time off so you can go on a cruise with 2 guys? I challenged. It's not what you think, she defended herself. Dave will be sharing a room with Emily. They've been friends for years. Sure, that sounds great, I replied sarcastically, making a mental note to thank Emily later. It seemed like it was going to be a long day. To pass time before the amusement park opened, we visited a hobby store. The girls were old enough to assemble most of the plastic models there. The end results weren't impressive, but they had fun. I let them explore while I admired the crafts available for creative homemakers. If Susan had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't have brought home that hairy gorilla. Too late now. I was thrilled to find rows of designer paint and spray cans. 5 beautiful pink cans caught my eye. They didn't hold as much as the ones at the hardware store, but they were pink. It was the only place I'd seen paint that color in a spray can. I took it as a sign and bought all 5. Lily chose a monster truck kit, and Amy picked a sailboat before leaving. I grabbed a package of 10 large plastic cable ties about 16 inches long. They looked sturdy enough. The amusement park was ready by then. The kids spent about 4 hours there, and after a pizza, they got tired. We fed ducks in the park with stale bread before heading to my parents' house. They were happy to have us for dinner. In the evening, Lily and Amy watched TV most of the night while I briefed Dad on the situation with Susan. I realized I was informing people about it before Susan could. Her threat seemed less significant. Dad promised to take care of the girls, which eased my mind. Around 9, I called Susan to say we'd be staying at my parents' house. I got the machine. After a hearty breakfast at a diner, we found Susan still in bed. I started mowing the lawn while the girls worked on their models. Even though it was a beautiful day outside, I let them go. I decided to make a full day of the lawn work, including edging and trimming. Things didn't go as fast as usual because I found myself chatting a lot. I had hedge trimmers but borrowed a set from Steve Harrington across the street. His wife Laura loved gossip. I warned Steve about unfamiliar cars at our house. If Susan entertained male friends and they got rowdy, he should call the police. It was hard for me to manage things since I worked nights. John Morgan from the local church lent me a spark plug wrench. I apologized for Susan's recent behavior. Naturally, he was curious. John was even more of a gossip than Laura Harrington. In just 10 minutes, he had enough gossip to last a month. I skipped lunch and wrapped up work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I headed to a cafe and treated myself to the priciest dish on the menu. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was delicious. I spent the evening with my brother Mark and his family, feeling somewhat lighter for the first time in days. Dad had already filled my brother in on the mess, so I crashed on his couch for the night. Susan had devised an elaborate plan to force me into accepting her infidelity by threatening to expose me as a cuckold if I didn't play along. She thought she could ruin my life, but her plan had many flaws. Within a week, I had already told everyone what was happening, effectively nullifying her threat. I also managed to portray her as a deceitful adulteress, something she clearly didn't expect. The next afternoon, I swung by the house to change for work, and Susan was there, fuming. She told me that Emily had mentioned rumors spreading among the neighbors about her running a brothel at night. I tried to calm her down, explaining that I had only told the neighbors that she might have male visitors while I was at work and that they shouldn't worry. But Susan insisted that the rumors were spiraling out of control and demanded to know who else I had spoken to. I admitted that I had told everyone, thinking it would be simpler. I hadn't mentioned anything to her parents or sisters and suggested she handle that before they heard the rumors. Susan was frustrated, feeling like the rumors made her look bad. I pointed out that the situation wasn't fair to me either, as it made me look like a betrayed fool. Susan apologized but said she had to leave for work, mentioning that she had managed to spend some time with the girls before she left, though it wasn't the quality time she had hoped for. That night, Mark had some crucial information. The dealership closed at 8 p.m. on Wednesdays, so Robert could handle the paychecks for Thursday. He hated being disturbed while doing payroll, so even the cleaning crew was gone. Evan took a few minutes to show me how to use the taser. No one volunteered to test it, but our plan was coming together. I fully expected to get caught and maybe even go to jail, but I didn't care. Robert needed to be taken down a peg. If I got arrested, I'd make sure all the newspapers and TV stations got the full story. That kind of publicity would crush him, or at least push him to make a mistake. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten a meal at home since this whole ordeal started. Finally, Wednesday arrived. I made sure my truck had a dead battery so Evan could pick me up. The floor supervisor rarely bothered us as long as we met our quotas and maintained quality. They left us alone. With our aprons, gloves, and welding masks, we all looked pretty much the same. At 8, I slipped out the back door. The guys took turns covering for me. One of their posts would be empty, but no one really cared. Bathroom breaks were normal and unregulated. The key was to make it look like I never left. I snuck into the dealership through the staff entrance and headed straight to the restroom. Around 8:30, someone checked the area quickly before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I put on latex gloves and left the restroom, moving into a dimly lit office area. Robert's desk faced the showroom, his back to the door. It was easier than I had anticipated. Despite the computer in front of him, he was using an old calculator with paper tape. He didn't hear me approach. I zapped Robert with the taser on the back of his neck. His body jerked upright. Fearing he might turn around, I zapped him again. This time he twitched a bit before relaxing. Perfect. I secured 2 plastic cable ties on each limb and used an old scarf as a blindfold. He didn't resist. I rolled his chair to the showroom window, where he'd be perfectly visible when his staff arrived in the morning. The pink paint absorbed into his clothing faster than I expected, requiring at least 3 coats to get the desired effect. I just had enough paint. He looked striking in pink. After finishing, I carefully packed everything up. I expected Robert to wake up during the process, but he remained still. I planned to remove the blindfold before leaving, but I checked my watch several times and still wanted him to wake up before I left. 5 minutes later, I started to worry. I tried to feel for a pulse but couldn't find one. Maybe the latex gloves hindered my sensitivity. I removed a glove and tried again. Still nothing. I tried to find a pulse on his neck like they do on TV but got nothing. I took off the blindfold and touched his eyeball with a pencil tip. No blink, no reflex. Panic set in. I quickly regained my composure, put the glove back on, and wiped down everything I might have touched. I pocketed the scarf and cut off all the plastic ties. Removing them revealed marks from the pink paint, which looked odd. The white skin where the scarf had been made him look like a pink raccoon. After ensuring I hadn't missed anything, I left. On my way back to the shop, I dumped all the evidence, including the taser, into a storm drain. 10 minutes later, I was back at work, making automotive parts. No one noticed I'd been gone. After the shift, I told the guys what had happened. They were all accomplices, so I was confident no one would spill. Alex was impressed, and none of them seemed worried. Evan drove me home, and we both noted the time of his drop-off. I couldn't sleep as long as usual. Around 8 a.m., Susan burst into my room. "What the hell did you do? What did you do, you fool?" I rolled over and gave her a puzzled look. "What are you talking about? Robert's dead." Emily called and said they found him in his office this morning, dead. "I know you had something to do with it, and I'll make sure you pay, you fool." That was the second time she called me a fool in 5 minutes. It was clear I wasn't getting any more sleep, so I dragged myself out of bed and went to the bathroom. Not eager to face Susan's wrath, I took a long, hot shower and shaved slowly, trying to figure out what to do next. I even splashed on some aftershave, hoping to irritate my dear wife. Before I could pour a cup of coffee, I saw a tall man in a dark suit standing in the living room, talking to Susan. His closely cropped hair and stern demeanor told me everything. I was dealing with a detective. Ignoring them, I headed into the kitchen to get my coffee. Susan shot me a sarcastic smirk as I settled into my favorite recliner. My uninvited guest followed me. "Mr. Harris, I'm Detective Luke Walker. I'm here about the death of Robert Jones last night. Your wife mentioned you had a disagreement with Mr. Jones recently, and I was hoping to ask you a few questions." "Sure, no problem, but not here," I said, setting my coffee down. "What do you mean?" the detective asked. "If you want to talk, let's do it in your office, not in my home. Is that okay with you?" I asked, noticing the disappointment on Susan's face. She clearly wanted to be part of the conversation. "Your car or mine, Mr. Harris?" he inquired. "I have some errands to run first, so I'll meet you there." "Which office?" "Third floor, room 15. Just turn left when you get off the elevator. I'll see you shortly." Susan was fuming as I put on my shoes. I didn't finish my coffee, so I dumped it in the sink and walked out the door, smirking. "Looks like you're getting what you wanted, darling," I said. "What are you talking about, Daniel?" she snapped. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Walker on the 3rd floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, he questioned me thoroughly, and I gave him straightforward answers. He touched on the affair delicately without being too blunt. Naturally, I admitted I had a motive, but I insisted I never had the opportunity to act on it. It was a serious matter, but I tried to be cooperative without being sarcastic. I think he appreciated my effort to make his job easier, even though I couldn't give him a clear answer. The most surprising part was learning that Robert had died from a heart condition. He had a pacemaker installed a few years back, which didn't react well to the taser. They figured out the taser involvement from the marks on his neck. I felt a mix of remorse and relief. Detective Walker gave me the usual don't leave town speech and said he'd contact me after confirming my alibi. It was unexpected. I never thought I'd need an alibi. We parted on good terms, and I sensed that Detective Walker was sympathetic, which was comforting. After grabbing a quick bite, I watched the local news. There was a segment about a local businessman's death, noting he had no family in the area. I withdrew money from our bank accounts and treated myself to a nice breakfast. There were things to take care of at home. When I returned, Susan wasn't there, so I moved all my belongings to the master bedroom and put hers in the guest room. The guest room had limited storage, so I piled her things on the bed for her to organize. I checked the phone recorder in the basement, but found nothing of interest. Gathering important documents like banking and insurance records, I stashed them in a folder under the front seat of my car. Susan's vehicle was in my name, which made things easier. I called work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, Susan came home, surprised to find me there. It was time to lay down the law. I grinned as I escorted her to the guest room. "What's going on? Who do you think you are?" she demanded, her tone defiant. "I'll be using the master bedroom from now on. You can have the guest room. Start putting away your clothes. Anything left out by dinner will be thrown away. Any questions? I can't fit my stuff in that tiny closet, and I won't stay in that room." "What do you mean thrown away? If it doesn't fit in the closet or dresser, you don't need it. This isn't up for debate. Daniel, you're in serious trouble. Get your act together. If you need clarification, ask later, fool." That was the third time that day she called me a fool. I must be making some progress. While Susan was busy in the guest room, I emptied her purse on the kitchen table. I took her cell phone and car keys, then from her wallet, I removed her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash. I left the rest. I retrieved her car title from the pickup and drove her car to a friend who owned a car lot across town. I sold it to him outright at a fair price, with the understanding he'd sell it wholesale out of town. Even after settling the loan, I pocketed a few thousand. As I headed into a fast food place for lunch, my cell phone rang. "You jerk! Where's my cell phone in my car?" she screamed. I was relieved she didn't call me a fool this time. She was using the house phone, which was a good test. I could check the recorder later. "I'm sorry, honey. I had to get money to hire a lawyer for the homicide charges. I promised to get you another car once I'm out of jail," I said, ending the call and turning off my cell phone. After that conversation, I realized getting a lawyer was crucial. No matter what happened, I was determined not to stay married, but I had to wait. I was next in line to order. When I got home, my daughters were there. I went straight to them, ignoring Susan. I glanced at her a few times and noticed she wasn't happy. The girls eagerly showed me their models. When Susan started preparing dinner, I wandered to the guest room. My clothes were back on the bed, and Susan was in the master bedroom. I chuckled, but chose not to argue. She was stubborn and determined. Susan told the girls to wash up for dinner, and I returned to the guest room to unpack. I would have loved to throw out her belongings, but that seemed too petty. Dinner was my treat tonight. Money wasn't an issue. I still had cash after the lawyer's deposit. The food was delicious. After dinner, I turned on my cell phone, hoping for a call from work or Detective Walker. The first call I got was from Susan, asking how she could go to the grocery store to pick up some items, including milk. I assured her that I'd take her shopping on the weekend when I was off work, suggesting it would be a good time for us to plan our trip together. I mentioned another call coming in and ended our conversation with a promise to talk later. The second call was from Evan, who let me know that Detective Walker had interviewed the entire crew, both individually and as a group, and everyone's stories had aligned. He added that Jack Everett, the floor manager, had given strong support, emphasizing that Evan couldn't have missed work. After tucking the girls in, I found Susan lounging on the couch with a glass of wine. I grabbed a cold beer and settled into my recliner, hoping to have a real conversation. When I brought up her plan to paint me as the villain, it abruptly ended the discussion. Susan finished her wine and retreated to her bedroom, clearly uninterested in talking. Disappointed, I sipped my beer and checked the phone recorder. The first call was to her sister. No cover-up there. Diane knew about the affair with Robert and supported Susan. That wasn't surprising. The next call, however, was to Susan's mom, who was clueless. Susan convinced her that Robert was a friend of Emily's and that I was jealous because I had been pursuing Emily for years. Although she didn't directly accuse me of homicide, it was heavily implied. Susan contacted the cell phone company about replacing the phone I took, but had no luck. She reached out to the DMV to report her driver's license lost and was advised to inform the police. When she called the bank to request a new credit card, she discovered the account was closed. I had to give her credit for being proactive. The final call on the machine was to Emily. Even though Emily lived nearby, they chose to talk by phone instead of meeting in person, which worked in my favor. From that call, I gleaned two important details. Robert's friend Mike was still coming from out of town, and Susan planned to lay low until his arrival. The next morning, I got up early with the girls and left the house before Susan woke up. We returned home after lunch, and Susan demanded I drive her to the grocery store since she had no car or driver's license. That evening, while she prepared dinner, I checked the recorder again. Mike had arrived and immediately called Susan. Their conversation was revealing. He believed Susan's story and was determined to seek revenge. Mike and Robert had been childhood friends, and he was hell-bent on justice. He provided Susan with his contact information and told her to call him the next day. Afterwards, Susan excitedly phoned Emily, expressing her happiness. It was hard to believe this was the same woman I'd been married to for years. Her transformation was sudden and complete. I never imagined my actions, aside from confronting her lover, would lead to such a drastic change. Before turning in, I grabbed a burger using the need to mow the lawn as an excuse to avoid Susan. The next day, around 10 a.m., Susan's parents showed up to take the girls for an unplanned sleepover. I didn't object. Grandma assured me they'd be back in time for school the next day. Eager to check the phone recorder, I waited until after lunch since I skipped breakfast. Following a quick shower, I headed to a diner. Susan made no mention of my absence. She and Mike had concocted a plan to avenge Robert's death, which seemed ludicrous given my knowledge of the situation. Their plan involved Mike entering the house through the back deck sliding door, which Susan assured him would be unlocked. If all went as planned, it would look like a burglary gone wrong, with me being shot. Both Susan and Emily were to call emergency services upon hearing the gunshot. At that moment, I realized I hadn't updated my insurance policy beneficiaries. As I left, I sarcastically blew a kiss to my wife, who responded with a middle finger. I had dinner with my parents and stayed the night. Before leaving, I borrowed Dad's shotgun for the upcoming event. Susan was in bed when I returned home, presumably reading. The lone message on the answer machine was from Emily, boasting about her and Mike's pleasurable afternoon. Before signing off, she assured Susan of their readiness. Late that night, I spent about 20 minutes swapping out the ammunition in the shotgun with non-lethal rounds. My intention wasn't to kill Mike, but to incapacitate him. Honestly, I hadn't wanted to hurt Robert either. I hoped Mike didn't have a bad heart like Robert did. Wanting to check the back deck door, I hesitated, fearing Mike might see me. I had to trust Susan had left it unlocked. I stripped down to my shorts and messed up the bed blankets. A cup of coffee would have been nice, but since none was available, I settled for a drink, waiting in my recliner with the cell phone close by. Mike didn't arrive until after midnight. Spotting him on the deck, I promptly dialed emergency services, reporting an intruder and expressing fear for my life. Keeping the line open, I watched the patio door slide open quietly, revealing Mike. I waited until he was fully inside before delivering the first blast. I aimed for his lower body to avoid killing him. The first shot knocked him back under the deck. With the second shot, he tumbled over the side, breaking the railing. I knew I hadn't killed him as he howled in pain. Man, that rock salt must have hurt. The shotgun blast was deafening indoors. My ears were ringing when I turned on the lights. Susan was already in the living room, screaming. Although she was shouting at me, her words were unintelligible. I approached to check on Mike and noticed a Ruger 22 automatic pistol with a silencer on the floor. Susan continued to scream, so I aimed the shotgun in her direction, causing her to quickly quiet down and flee the room. It appeared Mike had broken his ankle in the fall. Some guys seemed to have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first police car arrived, and there wasn't much discussion. I set the shotgun on the floor to avoid any misunderstandings, pointed to the phone, and informed the officers that everything was under control. When asked about other occupants, I mentioned Susan in the bedroom. They brought her into the living room, and despite their efforts to calm her, she continued to shout hysterically. A large female officer gently escorted her outside. I noticed Emily standing with some neighbors, observing the commotion. I gave her a mocking grin and drew my finger across my throat. causing her to quickly walk away. EMTs arrived to tend to Mike just as Detective Walker showed up. He smiled at me, and I couldn't help but grin back, a bit of defiant sass in my expression. The female officer escorted Susan back inside to get dressed. Once ready, we all headed to the police headquarters. I requested separate cars, and Detective Walker agreed, letting me ride with him. We didn't speak on the way downtown, but he kept glancing at me with a knowing smile. By the time Walker released me, the sun had risen. Although we only talked for about 30 minutes, they kept me at the station all night, making me drink coffee. A police car drove me home, and I was disappointed not to see yellow tape around the house. Everything looked normal. Even the rock salt hadn't damaged the glass door. Mike had taken the brunt of it. Fixing the broken railing would take about an hour, I estimated. I went to bed and didn't wake up until well past noon. After stumbling to the bathroom, I found Detective Walker sitting at the kitchen table, engrossed in the newspaper and sipping coffee, which he presumably brewed while I slept. Having had enough coffee the night before, I opted for a tall glass of orange juice and sat across from him, puzzled about how he had entered the house. "You're a cool customer, Mr. Harris," he remarked, not looking up from the paper. Unsure how to respond, I remained silent, wondering if he was testing me. Finally, I spoke. "Detective Walker, I need a shower, a shave, and some lunch. Ill treat unless it violates some police protocol. Take your time, Daniel." "I've got all day," he replied. As I headed to the shower, I pondered when he found time to sleep. Lunch consisted of 2 hefty sandwiches, and Walker even joined me in washing them down with a beer. The silence grew heavy until he broke it. "You have questions, don't you, Mr. Harris?" "Funny. I thought the same about you," I retorted. Walker flagged down the waiter for 2 more beers. "I spent the whole night grilling you. Now it's your turn." "Okay. First off, where's my wife?" "She's still in custody. Charges will be filed this afternoon." Downing my beer, I processed the unexpected news. I had a flood of questions but decided not to delve too deeply. Instead, I remarked, "Nice to see Susan's folks rallying for her, as I won't be." "No more questions, Detective Walker, but if you have something to spill, go ahead." He chuckled, taking a swig. "One more thing. Did you happen to overhear or record any conversations between your wife and Mike?" "You mean Mike?" That earned me a smirk. "If I did have such a recording, would you want it?" "I'm unsure. If things unfold as I anticipate, it may not matter. But if they get skilled lawyers, having such evidence could be troublesome." "Right. You're on to something. I'm just trying to streamline my job." "I manage without a hypothetical tape." I nodded slightly. "Thanks, Daniel. I think I should drive you home. Your girls will return from school soon, and will need their father." We reached the house just as Lily and Amy got off the school bus. They approached us, and I introduced them to my new detective friend. They were eager to see his badge and ask questions. However, the mood shifted when Walker inquired, "So, who built the sailboat and who assembled the monster truck?" "I built the truck," Lily exclaimed proudly, while Amy declared, "I did the sailboat. Want to see it?" With a promise to inspect them another time, Walker departed, leaving me stunned. He knew about the pink paint predicament and had the upper hand. Feeling cornered, we ordered pizza for dinner, and the girls didn't ask about their mom's whereabouts. After supper, Susan's dad called, asking for help to raise bail money for her release. Politely, I declined, wondering if he fully grasped the situation. When I inquired about her accommodation, he hesitated before stating she would stay with them. We loaded Susan's belongings into the pickup and dropped them off without incident. Returning home, I noticed a U-Haul truck in Emily's driveway, which disappeared the next morning. Susan never reached out, leaving me to gather updates from the daily newspaper. There was no trial. Susan pinned all the blame on Mike, who claimed it was her idea. Both took plea deals, with Susan receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide, and Mike getting 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities were involved regarding Mike's silencer, but postponed action until he served his initial sentence. Detective Walker never needed the tape and stopped mentioning it. Emily vanished without a trace. My dad retrieved his shotgun, joking that I might need it again someday. Chuckling, he mentioned that Susan served me with divorce papers once her jail term began. She didn't contest anything. It was clear she wanted nothing to do with me. Since the night I shot Mike, I hadn't seen or spoken to her. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents, unable to manage work and care for the girls alone. My colleagues welcomed me back, offering a switch to the day shift, but I declined. I regularly took the girls to visit their mother at the local women's prison. During these visits, I stayed in the car, usually for less than an hour, sometimes watching them through the chain-link fence if the weather was good. I didn't discuss the visits with the girls and asked them not to share any details. This arrangement seemed to work well for us until I got the phone call. "Hello, is this Daniel Harris?" "Yes, speaking. I am Amanda Johnson. Detective Luke Walker suggested I reach out to you. There are matters we need to discuss." "I'm aware, but why do you want to talk to me?" "Robert Jones was my brother." "Oh, great. Just when I thought I'd put all this behind me, now this." "I understand, but I don't think avoiding this conversation is wise. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called and proposed to meet. I replied, "Let's meet Saturday morning at 10 at the dealership. I'll bring my 2 daughters, they enjoy looking at classic cars." I didn't know her intentions, but felt safer in public with my girls. I wasn't using them as a shield, but hoped she'd be less likely to do anything. I realized I was overthinking I needed a beer. I called Detective Walker, who laughed and advised me to meet with her and stop worrying. Easy for him, he didn't eliminate her brother. The dealership was an impressive place with a main showroom and 2 large buildings at the back for cars needing restoration or display. I was surprised to find they were having a grand opening celebration. There were many things I didn't understand. Amy and Lily seemed torn between the cars and the freebies. The first thing that caught my attention was the smell of the popcorn machine. A person in floppy shoes and a rubber nose was handing out small bags of hot-popped kernels. Nearby, there was a soda machine and another person with a hot dog cart. The girls wouldn't need lunch today. Recognizing Amanda Johnson was easy. She walked toward me with a slow, purposeful stride that exuded confidence and determination. Her Italian heritage was unmistakable: dark hair, dark eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. While some might not have noticed her hips, they stood out given her short stature, barely 5 feet tall. Robert had been a towering figure, but Amanda was compact and sturdy. My unease grew as she approached, but it eased when I saw a smaller version of her by her side, a young girl of about 10 who looked just like her, with lighter hair and a more delicate frame. It seemed we both found solace in our children's presence. As Amanda reached me, she extended her hand. "Daniel Harris, I presume." I shook her hand, feeling a sense of familiarity, like a scene from an old movie. Despite her smile, there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes, which oddly made me feel more at ease. "Thank you for meeting with me," she began, her voice steady, but with an edge of tension. "I want you to understand the business thoroughly so we can take control. In the meantime, it's important that you assert yourself." Amanda admitted that her kindness had led Robert and his wife to try to take advantage of her. Her tone softened as she talked about their failed attempt, and I found myself chuckling at the irony. Over the next half hour, we discussed the terms of our arrangement. Amanda offered better pay and benefits than my factory job, with the option to return if things didn't work out, though I hoped they would. On the way home, Lily looked queasy, probably from too many hot dogs and sodas, while Amy seemed to enjoy chatting with the girl more than looking at cars. A good sign. Lily got sick in the truck and skipped supper. I started at the dealership the following Monday. As Amanda predicted, I quickly got the hang of things and earned the support of the employees, especially Mark's cousin, who became my strongest ally. Most wanted the business to succeed and were quick to report any issues. Amanda handed over the responsibility of firing employees to me, a task I found surprisingly satisfying. My reputation as a no-nonsense manager grew. Detective Walker stopped by often for coffee, and although our conversations were mostly casual, he eventually opened up to me. 3 years ago, I was a cop in Baltimore, he said. One day, I came home to find my wife in bed with my supervisor. I lost it, threw her out, and the department told me to quit or be fired. I moved here and found work, but not before making sure my wife's lover lost his job. I didn't press for more details, but his story explained why he seemed to favor my side. The girls agreed not to tell their mother about my new job. During visits, they mentioned the long drive casually, understanding it was necessary. I wanted Susan to see her daughters, not out of concern for her, but because I knew it would hurt her. It was a cruel satisfaction, but I took it anyway. Amanda and I began spending more time together, both at work and outside of it. One weekend, the girls insisted on taking her and her daughter to a local park. Mostly, we stayed close to home due to our living situations, which complicated any potential romance. While I was interested in a closer relationship with Amanda, it wasn't practical. I still lived with my parents and the girls, and Amanda and her daughter shared a small studio apartment. With the business doing well, Amanda started looking for a house. She spent hours online searching for the perfect one. My first clue about her intentions came when she mentioned wanting a 4-bedroom home for the girls. Daniel, I think each girl should have her own room. It's better to plan for that now than later. Don't you agree? I realized this was more than just a practical suggestion. Amanda was thinking about a future together. The possibility of a deeper relationship seemed real. Yeah, that's a great idea. A split bedroom plan would be even better. I don't like the idea of them being too close to the master bedroom, I added, trying to sound casual. Before leaving the office, Amanda's small smile reflected the unique bond we shared. Even though we hadn't engaged in romantic intimacy, I felt a deeper connection with her than I ever did with Susan in our 10 years together. 2 days after finalizing my divorce from Susan, we celebrated quietly at a seafood restaurant. The kids were oblivious to the significance, but Amanda knew. Later, back at the apartment while the kids watched a movie, Amanda kissed me in the kitchen. We laughed and hugged until her daughter caught us. "Whoops, sorry, Mom," she said, adding with a grin, "It's about time." For the rest of the evening, Amanda and I kept things platonic, but the anticipation of what lay ahead was palpable. The next day, with the kids at school, we took an extended lunch break and returned to the apartment, overflowing with pent-up energy. We didn't get back to work until just before the end of the day. Over time, our extended lunches became a regular thing, and Amanda grew more serious about finding a new house. Detective Walker often stopped by for casual visits, sometimes admiring the cars. He developed a particular fondness for a classic car previously owned by Leonard Blackwood, and Amanda offered him a good deal on it. Then, out of the blue, Amanda asked if I could take her to visit Susan. Despite our reduced number of visits, Susan didn't seem to mind. When I asked why, Amanda simply said, "Closure." Although I grasped the term, the concept felt somewhat foreign to me. I offered to go in with her, but Amanda insisted I just drive her, saying I didn't need to be present for their conversation. On a warm, sunny fall day, we arrived at the women's prison. Since visits were held outside, I parked near the fence. 10 minutes later, Susan and Amanda emerged into the exercise yard and sat at a table, chatting and smiling as if they were long-lost friends. But after a few minutes, Susan's smile faded, and she leaned across the table, scowling at Amanda. Meanwhile, Amanda remained calm and cheerful. Suddenly, Susan lunged at Amanda. The guards quickly intervened, dragging my ex-wife back inside as she shouted angrily. Amanda glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before leaving the visitors' area. She was still grinning when she got back to the car. "What was that all about?" I asked, puzzled. "Your ex-wife is quite sensitive," Amanda replied with a hint of amusement. After driving for a while, she turned to face me, straining against her seatbelt. I introduced myself and she seemed happy to see me. Everything was fine until she thought I was on her side. I might have misled her a bit at first. "How exactly?" I pressed. "I told her I came seeking revenge. She assumed I meant revenge against you. And what did you really mean?" "I meant taking over Robert's business as a form of retribution. I suppose you can still seek revenge on a dead person, right?" "Okay, but what made her so furious?" "She wanted all the details: when, where, and how. She was talking about you." I was intrigued. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it would take time and asked if she wanted updates." She was eager to know and insisted on specifics. When I explained my plan, she lost it. She went absolutely ballistic. All right. What was your plan?" Her smile widened. "I told her I was going to work you to death." "That's all?" "Yep. Isn't it funny?" I thought she might get angry, but I didn't expect such a dramatic reaction. We both sat there smiling in the silence. I felt a surge of pride for Amanda. "When do you plan to start this scheme?" I teased. "As soon as we get to the next motel, silly." 2 months later, Amanda and I got married in a simple ceremony in the backyard of our new home. Amanda sent Susan a wedding invitation with a brief note. "Everything is proceeding as planned. Expect him to be exhausted in 30 or 40 years."